And I said at the time, I wish I was Tony Baxter. I wish that I would just show up at Disneyland and they would just say, Tony, it's Main Street. What should we do? And Tony would go, I don't know, maybe that building could be blue. And there'd be someone and they'd go, oh, blue. and then when I left, I thought, that's never going to happen. And I just really have missed the opportunity of ever being in a situation like that. But then we did the enhancements and we'd be on Main Street and they'd say, Don, we're on Main Street. What color should that building be? I'd go, I don't know, blue. And they'd go, oh, blue. So I actually had to leave and do like the enhancement work before I received this idea, this mantle that I thought was only given to a rare few people.
That is former Disney Imagineer Don Carson, who's back for another Imagineering Roundtable with Chris Runco. It's going to be awesome. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks for joining me here on episode 145 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. I've really enjoyed doing these roundtable episodes because while it's great to talk about attractions that Imagineers have worked on, how they got into the industry, that is all awesome. I love it. But you don't always get the chance to dig that much further into concepts related to theme park design. And that can lead to cool stories and ideas of what's going to happen in the future and so much more. And that's what we can really do on these roundtable episodes. And especially when you get two really talented, smart Imagineers in there, they're going to bounce off each other. And that's definitely what happens this time. Really excited to bring back Don Carson once again. He's been a part of all these roundtables. Really, it was his idea to do this. I wish I had thought of it sooner, but I have to give credit to him. This time I bring in Chris Runco. He was on the podcast for 2 episodes this spring, talking all about his career. And both of them know each other well. And what I found so interesting here is that we really dig into concept art and the role it plays in attractions and what really makes a good piece of concept art and all the other things that go into it, where I just see the finished Typhoon Tilly with the boat up on the mountain. And you don't think about what went into that. How many sketches were there before the one that Disney released? And beyond that, we talk about small enhancements they've done, because that's something too. I often dig into the big ones, but what about some smaller projects that were still really important that just help to make the parks what they are? That's a big topic that we cover. We talk about technology and the future and kind of what makes an exciting theme park attraction that lasts. So much more. It was such a fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it, and I'm going to get right to it. Let's do this. Here are Chris Runco and Don Carson. Welcome to another Imagineering Roundtable. I'm really excited about this one. I have 2 great guests here on the podcast. My first guest joined Walt Disney Imagineering in 1989. He was lead show designer on Splash Mountain at Walt Disney World. He also created designs for Mickey's Toontown at Disneyland, developed concepts as a freelancer for projects like Cars Land and the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. He's back for his 5th appearance on the podcast. It is Don Carson. Don, thanks once again for returning on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. Always enjoyable to be here.
Oh, definitely. And I'm excited, too, to have you talk with my other guest here, who started as a portrait artist on Main Street at Disneyland in 1970, moved over to Walt Disney Imagineering in 1976, worked for Disney for more than 45 years total, was a lead designer and creative director on many projects, including Typhoon Lagoon, Grizzly River Run, the Redwood Creek Challenge Trail, designed the Rex 24 pilot for the original Star Tours, so much more. And he's back for his third appearance on the podcast. It is Chris Runco. Chris, thanks so much for joining me again.
Hey, I'm very glad to be here. I love having a conversation with you guys. And my old buddy, Don. It's great. Oh, yeah, I was going to tell Don how much this means to me. So, you've got a friend in me. You got a friend in me. So it's out of tune. It's not me. It's out of tune.
I'm going to play that for every guest now. I'm just gonna cut in Chris saying that and just say, Chris, he appreciates all of you, but especially Don. So thank you for that, Chris. But so we're going to talk about some bigger topics related to theme park design and a lot of cool questions. Before that, I wanted to briefly ask each of you about something you've been doing recently. Don, so I know I've been following your YouTube channel for a while, and I really enjoy some of the things you post there about theme park design. And recently, I noticed you've been doing some videos where you're kind of putting things together with a VR program called Facebook Horizon. I admit I know almost nothing about this program. I learned about it mostly this week, but I'd love to know what interested you about this tool and kind of what you've been doing with that.
Well, Facebook Horizon is in invite-only beta and has been for a little over a year now. And I joined probably 7 or 8 months ago. It is meant to be, when it is released, a VR location where you can meet your friends, but it has a creator component. And it's a very simplistic sort of Lego-like, take primitive shapes and erect it into various things. But one of the things it has is the ability to add music, theatrical lighting, and various other effects. And I've been using it as a sort of a teaching tool for the principles that we use in theme park design by using these blocks to build these environments. So even though the things that I am building can only be viewed in Horizon, I've been using it as sort of a very, very quick way to talk about principles of design in a very visceral way. You know, grab a light, move it, and see how it changes the feeling of an environment. It tickles my relatively recent interest in VR as a way in which for us to communicate the designs that are inside our heads.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. You set up several where you were you called it a museum of, I'm going to butcher it, but environmental design. And you were kind of using it as a way to show kind of how different elements of a theme space interacts. Is it particularly good for doing that? Is this a good tool for presenting that in a way?
I think someday a tool will exist, hopefully, that will allow us to do this. This was not designed to do what I'm doing with it, but it's a really nice way to describe what is otherwise kind of esoteric ideas about environmental design. And also it challenges me to do these principles with super simple shapes. You know, big sphere in a room, getting larger in the next room is a way to talk about how the presence of objects can change how you emotionally respond to it. Stuff that I've been writing about for years, but you can try to draw it, but there's just nothing quite like being in the same room with this element to go, oh, it really does make me feel differently to be in this space with this design choice.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me, especially as somebody who's not a theme park designer. I found it was very helpful just to learn about some certain concepts. So I think it's really cool. So Chris, I've also really enjoyed on Instagram, you've lately been posting a lot of just great sketches and photos. You showed some art from Shark Reef, a blueprint from Typhoon. There's a lot more than that. But I'm just curious, you started it up pretty recently, a few months back. What really got you interested in kind of starting to post some of this material that you've accumulated over the years or that you have?
Well, at the risk of sounding really old-fashioned, I did a podcast, whatever it was, about 6 months ago. And at the end of it, the interviewer said, "So what are your socials?" And I said, "I don't even know what you mean." And so afterwards he said, socials like Twitter and Facebook and, and Instagram. And I'm going, I'll get back to you about that. So I went and, I start with my IT support, which are my sons, and said, what do I do? And then I started to see the possibilities. I mean, I've been following people, and that coincided with the fact that I'm really kind of organizing my archives at home, so to speak, in that I have, a lot of artwork, non-Disney artwork, and files, references, reference books, photos I took during projects, just all art, little memorabilia and all. And I've been trying to organize those. And it started to click for me that, well, I could post a picture of this and then tell a story about it, why this is important to me. For example, I have this wonderful railroad spike that came. It's one of the original railroad spikes from Disneyland. And I was working in the Anaheim office, 2000, 2005. And that's when they ripped a whole bunch of the track out to renovate it. We would walk over that every day and see, them doing the work. And one day our boss, Stan Dodd, had one delivered, and everybody had one on their desk with a little tag saying where it was from. Rusted in the happiest dirt on earth, I think is the tag that was on it. So I just posted that picture because to me that's a fun story. And it was two things that it's a good time for me to organize these and also weed it out. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there that doesn't need keeping. And document it, and secondly, tell a story about it. Plus, I've also, this is important in that there's a wonderful series of books called Walt's People, and Didier Guez, a great writer, has put that together. He's part of the Hyperion Historical Alliance, and he's done these great books about Disney animation. And those books have focused on the studio, and now they're starting to focus on other areas of the company, including Imagineering. So I interviewed with him. He's done a bunch of Imagineers now. And I got an interview with him. We talked like last year, and I think I'm supposed to be in the next issue of that. But it's not illustrated. It's just, our conversation. And I'm a visual person. So I'm going, I love telling these stories, and it's fun to have that, that back and forth and the questions you get. So how could I do that and show some pictures too, tell the story in a visual way. So it's, it kind of was the right time to get into it. And I have a lot of fun, but it does take longer than I think. Yeah, each one of them, it's just like, got to write it up, got to edit the picture, got to get it up there. And it's not, I admire Don that he can manage to do all these, work with all this software and even new software and keep up with it. Cause I can't keep up anymore. I just, if it's not Photoshop, I have no clue.
I have the sharing bug. I can't stop sharing. And I hope that other people find it interesting, but I'm constantly posting really esoteric stuff.
Oh, yeah, I haven't seen the Horizon thing or the YouTube clips. I've got to look those up now. I'm glad
I will send you.
I'm glad I came and found out about it.
I started a Patreon page last year, and mainly I did it so that I could find a small group of people I could have sort of the water cooler conversation. Mm-hmm. That I don't have working remotely. It has been somewhat successful in that there are some dedicated people who subscribe to it, but the conversation is not as dynamic as I would like. In fact, I think Facebook probably would be better, or Instagram. But it has allowed me to post a lot of really some stuff that I probably would feel more uncomfortable posting to the wide world or Twitter, and also talk about some really detailed information that is really specifically interested to the handful of people that are there. So that's where a lot of that Horizon stuff is.
I love the fact that we can have these conversations now long distance.
Yeah.
In a really effective way, including what we're doing here.
Yeah.
But exactly what I love the way you called it, a water cooler conversation.
Well, yeah. I mean, just both examples, like you mentioned, Chris, where you'll post a picture and write something, pretty long about it. And like you said, it's a story, and me just, in the middle of the country is looking at it going like, wow, that's really interesting, and get it. Or like with Don, some of the things you've done, not even just with Horizon, where it's like, I'm going to teach you this for 30 minutes on YouTube, and I'll just put it on. It's like, oh, Don's just here telling me about theme park design. This is great. And as you get so used to it, and it's like stuff we didn't, it's amazing what we can do with some of these things. Like, I mean, how well we can be connected. And like you said, just like we're doing right now, all three of us are in completely different states, and it's very easy. Well, I think we should dive into some fun questions here that both of you helped me kind of come up with related to topics about theme park design. And so I'm just going to start, one thing we talked about, which I think I probably as much someone who does this, where when I'm talking with someone, especially someone new who's been an Imagineer, I'll just be like, tell me about this big attraction you worked on, or tell me about, Typhoon Lagoon or whatever. When I don't talk as much about a lot of times with an Imagineer, you're doing smaller enhancements, little projects. And I don't even mean little makes it sound like they're not important, but no, just not projects that take 5 years and cost $1 billion, different size projects. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. I'm going to start with you, Don, about what's been your experience just with creating smaller enhancements for the parks, and kind of what's that been like for you?
Well, one of the reasons I was so excited to get a chance to be here with Chris is that when I think of Imagineering and I think of the various roles there, Chris is the living embodiment of the sketch artist that produces the thousands of images that are the fuel for the finished product. And I think that the public is kind of used to seeing the sort of finished illustration that marketing has deemed the thing that is influencing design. But really what's happening is that in the brainstorming sessions and in the early stages of Blue Sky and concept, there are these really quick, often just black and white sketches that are starting to throw out ideas. And Chris is the grand master of getting it down, getting it quickly, and often inspiring the most iconic things you can think about. The foundation of an attraction is based upon some of these really, really early sketches. Even when I was at Imagineering eons ago, although I would do them, I didn't feel as free as I could see that Chris was able to produce them. I really, really fostered the skill of sitting in a brainstorming meeting and just pumping out drawings, because that's often the thing that kicks off the direction. It also is worth mentioning that a really good idea can be sold with a not so great drawing. It's really about getting the idea of the drawing done more than it is necessarily about producing a piece of art. And so to the long intro into those smaller projects, one of the things that we've both gotten to do is they would fly us out to Florida, they'd fly us to a park, and they'd say, we've got X number of dollars to spend on enhancing this existing park. And working in partnership with operations, you guys have to figure out how to spend the money. And so some of that is my absolute favorite work. It's wandering around a park and going and looking at garbage cans and looking at curbs and looking at the things that operations really needs to fix, and finding thematic story ways to enhance those parks in ways that have no fanfare. But as a visitor, you come back year after year and you go, the place always feels like it's evolving and getting better. And that's due to, in a large part, to that effort of creating all those sketches that enhance those parks. And as that effort, you might produce 100, 200 drawings, and maybe a dozen of them are the things that they base the finished product on. But it's the act of doing all those drawings which make the parks better.
I just came to hear him pat me on the back like that. Just keep talking, Don. I'm just going to sit here.
This is so great. I love Chris.
That's all I need. I was writing some down. I agree with him, with Don, that there's an energy about a big project, which takes years most of the time. It takes several years. That's a long distance run. That's a marathon. And you start out and you talk about 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. It's like 1/10 of 1% inspiration. It's like in the room, or you go do some ideas, you come in, and somebody goes, that's it, and we're going to do that. And you go out all excited because, hey, this idea I did is going to happen. And then you trudge along for 3 years to get it built through endless value engineering, where this gets taken out and this gets refined and in endless meetings and it just so you have to be prepared to do that and carry through. And some of the nice things about these small jobs is they're often on a schedule where it is, okay, we've got this money, we've got to spend it in the next 2 months, and we know we want to do something in here. What do we want to do? And we go do it. And I got a couple examples that popped in my head, and I'll bounce around. But one of them was a little thing. So I'm working down at Anaheim, the WDI Anaheim, and we're redoing the castle for the 50th. And Kim Irvine came with this absolutely beautiful concept of like dressing the castle in jewelry. And it's one time where a lot of people had taken a stab at how to decorate that castle for the 50th. And Kim nailed it. And she literally went off on a weekend and came back with this design. And everybody said, that's it, after all these other tries. And I thought, this is one of those places where a woman's touch was absolutely the right thing. She just, she made it this wonderful, like a jewelry box of gold and diamonds and so forth. And then it was executed really well. While it was going on, we had to cover it up. And we talked about the idea that some buildings where you print a picture of the building and put it up, and we've done that lately. But this was kind of early on. So what they did is Disneyland built the scaffold around the whole thing and covered it in blue tarps. So it meant that guests walked into the park, and there's the weenie of the park, and it's a big blue blob, And they started to get complaints like you couldn't believe. Like, I spent months saving it. This is our trip once a year, and I come in and the castle is a blue box. What are we going to do? So I think it was Tom Fitz and Marty at the time. But anyway, one of their meetings down the line, they said, we got to do something about this. But they said, Chris, or Kim said, Chris, try some different things. So I played with it, and the idea I came up was, what if there were characters that were part of that picture? And then I tried different ones, and one of them was the playing cards, because it was all going to be people out there repainting and touching up. So what about Alice's playing cards? The painting the roses red. So they're all over the scaffold, and they're doing it. Of course, they're doing a terrible job and pouring paint all over the wrong things and spilling it on each other and all that stuff. And I just did this quick sketch. It was, just a little marker sketch. I think I did took Photoshop. I took a photo, and then I did drawings, and then I pasted them in Photoshop. And I brought it to the next meeting, and they literally said, that's what we got to do. Okay, do it right away. And I literally took the drawing out of that meeting, walked down the street to the carpenter shop and the graphic shop, said, this is what we're going to do as fast as we can. We sat there and talked about, okay, let's use this kind of material for that. And this kind of, we can get it on there. This is how we'll connect them to the scaffold in the carpenter shop. And they all said, you want it when? And graphic shop, and they said, okay, just give us the artwork. Next day, I'm down there with a copy of all my drawings of the characters. They're working on it. The installation was 2 nights later, where we're bringing in the crane on Thursday night, get those things painted, and be there at midnight. Park closes at midnight. We'll start working at 1, and we start installing them. So 3 nights later, I'm out there arm waving to get these things hung right, and these guys are, connecting them up and all that. So sometimes things happen in a hurry. And I actually got a note from Marty, the infamous notes that Marty always sent out, the wonderful notes about just thanking me for coming up with a solution, making a negative into a plus. Because then people came and go, oh, you had to take a picture in front of the castle. It's never going to look like this again. And it's so funny because there's all these characters draped all over it. So, and it had, it's a great team of people. And actually, the Disneyland shops are really used to that kind of thing. They, unlike, our usual production process, those guys will frequently get somebody running in and saying, we need a new sign for this store and we need it tomorrow morning. Or we need this fixed. This fell apart in front of, the Golden Horseshoe and we need it replaced as fast as you can. And so we don't have to have, cones out there or anything. So they're used to that. So it didn't scare them any. And they're, they're amazing craftsmen. So anyway, that was one really fun one. And I'll throw in one more because there were several like this. So we did the overlay of the mansion one year, and I'm trying to remember if it's when we made Leota the ball float. I think the R&D guys had worked that out, and we're putting that in. But they were also working on the attic scene, and they'd come up with this story idea that we would make more of a story out of the bride. And so we would represent the bride in her and they had this whole backstory about how she's really the Black Widow. She's had 6 or 7 husbands, and there's Henry VIII, but whatever it was, in portrait and props, we would represent her and all these deceased husbands. And so I did a series of sketches of these things. And again, it was kind of quick, like marker sketches, and then, picking the best ones. And then it was up to WDI where they created an effect where there'd be a portrait and then the husband's head would disappear. Somehow they all got beheaded. I don't, how did that happen? And then, of course, you see the bride at the end, and I had a sketch of that. In fact, what I'll do is if I find that, I'll stick that on the Instagram thing sometime soon. But it's she actually, with the original effect was she was going to sit there and just get this creepy smile on her face, and she had this bouquet of dead roses in her hand and lift it up, and it would turn into an axe. Well, it turns out you don't really have time in there to see that three or 4 seconds. You really have only a split second to see it. So it became just her and her axe. But that was a quick job. Where it was enhancements of the ride, and of course it all added some nice fun touches for things. And I agree. It's just that sense that there's always something fresh and always something new, and the story, and also everybody would work very hard, especially with those classic attractions, to make sure it fit in and did not distract from it, that it still worked with, the original magic. Oh, yeah, those were very satisfying.
Yeah, those big projects are prestigious, but sometimes, like you said, it takes years before it gets done. And there's no guarantee that something you've worked on for a couple of years won't get canceled. So it's a breath of fresh air when someone says, quick, do a sketch of this thing. And then before you know it, they don't have enough time to do, show set drawings. They just go build the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny too, because I think of it as someone, I think some guests probably think more that a lot of attractions happen that way, where there's like, okay, sketch, go, do it, and not all the other elements that are the challenges. So it's probably a little stressful, but it's nice to sometimes hear about something that happens in 2 days or in a shorter period of time, because, I doubt, like you said, that's rarely the case. But, so I know, Don, you mentioned about kind of visiting the parks and some changes. I mean, how difficult is it when you kind of come up with those changes? Like you mentioned, working with operations, is that, it could be really good, but how do you balance the creative, fun projects with things that are actually going to work?
You know that you're hired to come up with as many ideas you possibly can, and as part of your job description is to work within the limitations of the budget or what the needs of operations. That of your 100 drawings, maybe 5 of them will get built. In the case of the Florida enhancement projects, which mostly happened after I had left Imagineering and I worked as a freelancer, is that each year, usually Chuck Ballou and I would be partnered, and we would fly out there and we would spend a week and we would go from park to park, and they would give us their long list of things that we had to enhance. And then the next year when we came back, they would joyfully take us around to show us the things that they built from the previous year. And I do have one story. We had some money to do some enhancements of Typhoon Lagoon. And so I had done this drawing of, it was one of the water fountains, drinking fountains, and we had made it out of like lots of found pipes. But the idea was you're in a bathing suit, so that when you walk up and take a drink of water, it would squirt you in places that you hadn't expected it to squirt. And so that's great for a water park. And so here we are, we're all in our suits, before the opening of Typhoon Lagoon. And one of the executives says, "Oh, you got to see this." And he runs out there and he turns it on, and it squirts water right into his crotch. And like, oh, we hadn't actually thought that executives would potentially be using this water fountain. But that was wonderful. And I have to say that when the years prior to my leaving, if someone had asked me, what would be your ultimate, how would you imagine yourself being treated as a Disney designer? And I said at the time, I wish I was Tony Baxter. I wish that I would just show up at Disneyland and they would just say, "Tony, it's Main Street. What should we do?" And Tony would go, "I don't know, maybe that building could be blue." And there'd be someone, and they'd go, "Oh, blue." And then when I left, I thought, that's never going to happen. And I just really have missed the opportunity of ever being in a situation like that. But then we did the enhancements, and we'd be on Main Street, and they'd say, "Don, we're on Main Street. What color should that building be?" I'd go, "I don't know, blue." And they'd go, "Oh, blue." So I actually had to leave and do like the enhancement work before I received this idea, this mantle that I thought was only given to a rare few people. Very funny. Some of my favorite stuff.
I love that because, you get to be Tony Baxter and for a little bit, and then you get to go back. It's great.
Just the point Don made, that's the wonderful feeling. But there are the 99 other drawings that don't get built.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, or I shouldn't say that. There's the 98 that don't get built. There's the one that gets built wrong. And then there's the one that gets built and you're pretty happy with it.
Yeah. Or it's the one that gets built and then they don't remember you worked on it.
Yeah.
Oh, did you work on that? Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Well, actually, after I left, you guys got the IRC, you got the computers in your office where you had access to the entire archive. So that was the only sort of saving grace, was knowing that I was producing, thousands of drawings and most of which would never be seen anybody, but they would be seen if a designer, typed in the moon or the color blue or palm trees. That if one of those drawings had one of those elements, that eyeballs would see those sketches, and maybe they would influence some from future design, even though they weren't used for what they were intended.
Okay, I'm going to admit it right here. I didn't do a thing in the last 10 years at WDI, but just look through the archives and say, what did John Carson draw? I need a good idea. Where is it? I'll steal this one and I won't tell anybody.
I would do the same for you, Chris.
Yeah.
Wow, that's quite a revelation here. I'm amazed that I'm here for this. This is
there
great.
you go. Now that's out. The secret.
It's out in the world.
Just steal each other's work. Yes.
Oh, I want to tell you about a job that didn't quite come out right, since we're on that topic. So we put Jack Sparrow into Pirates. And I love the team. Kathy Rogers, the team that worked on that, did a fabulous job. And they really, everybody was scared to death of touching the crown jewel and how it would come out. But they did such a good job at integrating the pieces that every one of them, is very enjoyable. But one I got to work on was they wanted me to figure out how to stage Jack next to the well scene. So I did a whole series of sketches of Jack next to the well scene, like and how he would appear, because this is like the first time you've seen him. So he's got to kind of sneak in. So I did one where he's like walking with a dinghy over his head and he lifts it to look at the boat and then pulls it back down. So it's, that's the thing. Mm-hmm. And I did one where, let's see, he's like, there's an extra little boat and he's behind the sail and he literally like pulls the sail down, looks at us and then puts the sail back up because everybody's going, where's Jack Sparrow? Show me Jack Sparrow, and so where is he? So, and then I did one where it's the dressmaker shop and some of the dresses are out on the out in front of the shop. And I did it so when you see him, his head is on top of the dress. Mm-hmm. It looks like he's wearing the dress. And he so they're looking at, so if they look over, it's like one of those Three Stooges movies or something. You look over and you just see dressmakers dummies and you don't realize it's not it's Jack Sparrow's head on top of one of them. Mm-hmm. That was the gag. Okay, so I do the sketches. They decided they like that one. I think Chris Turner even did a beautiful rendition of, each one of those the ideas that ended up in the ride. I go down there after they've installed it and I look and here's the dressmaker's dummy. And about 2 feet away is Jack Sparrow. I go, well, wait a minute. He's supposed to be, like his head's supposed to be on that thing. And so what happens is the boat comes around and he's obscured behind the dressmaker dummies. But when you don't see him till you get kind of past them. And then he's standing there with one hand on part of the dressmaker dummy. And I think there was even a discussion about where his hand should actually be placed because it's Jack Sparrow after all. But anyway, he didn't. It wasn't the gag I intended to do, And I always look at that going, no, just give me a wrench. I could fix that. I'll go in there one night and I'll just slide it over. Best laid plans. So
yeah, well, the designer is seldom 100% happy because all we do is look at the thing that could have been.
Oh, yeah. I love that when you were talking about that in one of the last podcasts. And I was going, you don't want to ask us to critique anything because we'll tear it apart. We'll just tear it apart. We'll just talk about it.
Yeah, we just opened a water park in New Jersey. And whenever anybody congratulates me, I just want to apologize. Because it's fine. But there's a couple things I'd fix.
Yeah, that's the Madagascar one?
Yeah, it's the DreamWorks one, yeah.
Yeah, the pictures look great.
Yeah, don't screw it.
Looks perfect to me.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's right. We're a terrible audience.
We're terrible.
Yeah.
We're also terrible to go to the parks with.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody else is like having fun and we're going, how does that work? Like, there's some bulbs burned out over there. Like,
what were they thinking? Did you see the color scheme they used over there? Yes. That's just cheap. I didn't. Everybody else is like having a good time, and
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I try really hard not to do that. I try really hard. I heard a story once that Marty Sklar's kids hated to go to the park with him because they said, actually his grandkids, they said, I hate going with Grandpa because he's constantly bending down and picking up the trash everywhere we go. We can't ever, or he's talking to the staff and saying,
I was thinking about last episode with Chris Merritt where Don, you were talking about a curb that was a real challenge. So I know that became up, the same similar topic, but
Yes.
I don't want to make you revisit all that pain again, but I could just ask for more stories, but I will go on to another question, but it relates to what you've talked about already, which Don, I know you mentioned in your intro, is about concept art. And just, we often will see, I will see the one that comes out when Disney says, we're going to do a new attraction and here's what it's going to be. And here's one clip. But I know, like you mentioned, there's been a lot more art put into place, some different directions. But so I'm going to address this to Chris. What is really, this is like the biggest question, probably challenging to answer, but what's the secret to like when a concept art is really effective? Like what makes a concept work or just be effective versus other pieces of art possibly?
Luck. No.
Yeah.
No, I did think about this a little bit, and I actually got something I think I'm going to put on Instagram as kind of an example. Well, I'll give you a little background. Mark Davis was the absolute master of telling a story visually. It's that animation training. I'm sure. I mean, if you look at the storyboard artists, Bill Peet, Ken Anderson, all of them, they just, that was what they learned to do. But I couldn't get enough of studying Mark Davis's pictures because he told the whole story in a single shot. Mm-hmm. There was no doubt. You looked and you read it and you knew exactly what was going to happen. And it was almost an afterthought when he would say, yeah, the head turns like this and the arm turns like this, because the animation is rarely told, the story is rarely told in the animation. And I think that's partly because he didn't have the animation tools we have now, which are much more sophisticated. He might have relied on them more. But at the time, especially, he was just so good at framing it. And there's animation tools in that. One of them is the silhouette. The silhouette is what reads first. And animators know you design to tell the story with the silhouette. So the arms are not in front of the body. The arms have to be where they're readable as a silhouette. That kind of thing. So that's part of the trick. So animation tools help. The second thing that comes to mind is one of the things I did starting in college, and actually before that, I did a lot of cartooning, and I did editorial cartooning, and I actually still do some of that now when I feel like it, when I get bugged enough by something going on. On one of my other Instagram pages, I'll throw up one of those, and I actually did it for local papers here in town and won a couple awards. There's a state contest every year, and I did it for like 10 years. And that's another tool of one of my favorite artists was Paul Conrad. He was a master of that as well. And so was Herblock and Oliphant and all these great guys. They're still some of my favorite artists to look at, those editorial cartoonists. And again, what do they have to do? The really good ones tell a story and it hits you right between the eyes the moment you look at it. There are other kinds that maybe have a storyline, a storyboard, or different things. But the ones that really are super impactful are those ones that just the image tells the story the moment you see it. So I think that, and there's a third example that just came to mind, and that is that I remember Randy Bright talking about the art of the attraction poster. The good attraction posters, you walk up and you instantly know what you're going to experience and how much fun it's going to be. It's all about showing how exciting it is. You think of like the Peter Pan poster, and there's the boat flying over London, right? And you're in the boat surrounded by stars. Dumbo, just those great original posters are the quintessential image. Secondly, this is not a place to go read a novel. It's not the kind of experience it is. The audience comes in, it's sensory overload. There's a million things to see. You won't see them if you come 1,000 times. There's still new things to see. So you have to direct them with the tools, the architectural tools, like the target, the castle, the weenie, and those kinds of tools. But secondly, it's all quick reads. It's the nature of it. It is not a novel. It is quick reads. It's like cartoons, and it was built by cartoonists, in many ways. So to me, the concept art, it tells the story. And in the audience, in that case, it's all about knowing your audience. Your audience is not, the first audience you have is not the guest. The first audience you have are those executives, the decision makers, and the art directors. maybe all together, maybe separately, but you've got to put stuff on the wall. And when they walk in, you need, like my object was always to tell the story before I say a word. I want them to know what they're going to get. And then I embellish it with telling the story and kind of laying it out. But really, I put it up there with the idea that if they walk in and I don't say a word, they will look and they'll get it, what they're gonna get. So that directness, I think, it would help us sell things, and it would also help because that is the way the guests will experience it too.
Were you part of that junket that went to Florida to do the brainstorming for Blizzard Beach? Were you in that?
No, but I did work on it afterwards.
Yeah, there was a week-long brainstorming session, and that always seems like, really, we're going to brainstorm for a week, but it definitely falls into the category of what sausage being made. But we all got together, and we toured the water park. The idea was that Typhoon Lagoon was so incredibly popular that it opened at 8 and closed at 9 because it had filled to capacity for the day, and so they desperately needed another Typhoon Lagoon, and so they got a bunch of us to go to. Hani Masri was there, and Ben Tripp was there, and Julie Svensson was there. And we were just all piled in this big room. But the Disney Resorts people wanted to be embedded into the room with us to see what it was and how we did it. What are these crazy people doing, and how do they come up with these ideas? Well, when you have that many people who are being, fed and being told to fill rooms full of concepts, by about 2:30, you get really silly. And so you start just coming up with, you've got some concrete stuff, everybody's working, but after a while you get really, really snarky. And with Ben Tripp in the room too, you would get some incredibly politically incorrect stuff. So there ended up being boards for each of the potential water park ideas. And we had three boards for ideas that had potential. And then we had a fourth board that was everything we couldn't show anybody. And so we just actively would fill that board. So finally, we ended up having a presentation for Michael Eisner. And I think we had a Little Mermaid, entire Little Mermaid water park. That's kind of a no-brainer. We had an Acapulco one because that would be easy to do, and we do a good job. And then we had this weird idea of having a blizzard in Florida, of all places. And then we had this other board of just ridiculous stuff. And so Michael Eisner looked at it and he said, you could easily pull off the Little Mermaid, and you could also pull off the Acapulco one. But your Imagineering, if anybody can pull off a snow-covered mountain in Florida, you can. And he greenlit Blizzard Beach at that moment. And then he looked to the resorts guys who had been mute the entire time. And they said, okay, you were in here. Tell us, spill the beans. What was it like? And the guy shook his head and he said, it was sheer madness. He said, I was 2 days into this process and I went, these guys are crazy. Why do they pay these people to come up with this stuff? They're obviously just having way too good a time, and they're coming up with completely unusable ideas. But he said, but it magically came together into these amazing concepts, all of which would have been made into wonderful water parks. And one added little twist to it was that the head of the resorts at the time had given us tours of Typhoon Lagoon and their shark reef, which is a fantastic experience of being able to swim with the sharks, but it has the lowest capacity of anything they'd ever done before. And so as far as operations was concerned, it was considered way too expensive, way too much staff. It was no way. So he made a point of telling us, I don't care what you come up with, but whatever you do, do not come up with anything that is at all like Shark Reef for operational reasons. And he made such a point of pointing this out to us that we thought that was hilarious. So before the meeting was held, we created a fifth park called the Shark Reef Resort, which we created nothing but fake ideas for an all Shark Reef resort. And then Eric Jacobson had t-shirts printed where every one of us wore, and it said, ask me about the Shark Reef Resort. And when the head of resorts came in, he came into an entire room with everybody wearing nothing but ask me about the Shark Reef Resort, with an entire presentation board for that. And then, of course, we let him know we were pulling his leg.
Oh, yeah. What does his face look like?
Oh, he was completely shocked. Because he had really quite made a fool of himself, demanding that we never, ever do anything like that.
Yeah, that's the fun. The craziness and what you mentioned. Oh, and then pulling together. Yeah, that's... I know the point I was going to make, and that is the impossible ideas are very much in a very critical part of the whole thing.
Right.
I had a couple times where we had kind of new show producers that we're working with, hadn't beaten them into shape yet, so to speak. And I remember we're sitting there and we're brainstorming and we're going off on a tangent and we're flying over them. And they were just, they were getting so flustered going, we're supposed to get this job done. And you guys are out like on left field. And I'm going, it's okay. And then we can never build that. I'm going, yeah, but you never can tell what it might,
never can tell.
And it's like, relax. It's gonna be cool. And because often it's funny because there's these books that we put out a long time ago, the Imagineering Way. And I think that's exactly, I have a page in there and that's exactly what I said is think crazy for a while,
Yeah.
The old improv technique, you take things that make no sense together and you slam them together and you get something new. And a lot of them fail, but then you'll get one that's just a jewel, that really
you get
works.
so punchy. But about 2:30 when their lunches finally hit your brain and you're about to fall asleep, everybody gets silly and punchy and really feels that they're done. And one of the rules of brainstorming is there are no bad ideas. Right. So at that point, you end up coming up with sarcastic. I go, well, what if it's this? And it's that moment where everybody goes, that's terrible. Wait a minute. And then before you know it, we're all drawing a version of that. Exactly. And then that, what if there was a boat stuck on the top of the mountain and then every so often the guys are shot through the chimney? That could not have happened without that sort of absurdity and wonderful what if that happens deep into a brainstorming session.
Well, it's a snow-covered mountain in Florida.
That's so dumb. Yeah.
You're going to do what?
Yeah.
I was going to ask the question right before you said that. I was going to be like, how many times does the impossible weird board actually lead to the real attraction? Like, does that happen, every once in a while? I mean, because I can think that sometimes too, the ideas can be so straightforward and so obvious that they don't hit. You have to almost, it's somewhere in the middle probably, but to those impossible ideas, I guess they do sometimes end up hitting it pretty much.
Well, there's also a weird dynamic that happens. Marie Miller, who we both worked with at Imagineering, she was brilliant at coming up with the perfect idea 2 minutes into the brainstorming session. But the problem with that was that nobody had gone down the road that she had gone in her mind. So she would come in and she would say like, I know what it is. It's owls. And everybody would look at her and go, okay, that's interesting. And a card would go on the board, owls. And then about 4 hours into it, someone would come up and say, what about owls? And then everybody would go, oh my gosh, owls, that's the perfect thing. And Marie would look over to me and say, didn't I say owls like the first thing when we came in here? And I said, yeah, but it took us this long to get to where you were. Yeah. And she did that time and again, where she had deduced the exact place we needed to go, but it would take, the rest of the room the entire afternoon before we all got there.
Yeah, everybody have to catch up. Unfortunately, that's also a common thing that women run into. Yeah. Where, in fact, I heard this strategy that women have learned, which is that they'll often speak up, say something, it gets ignored way too often. Of course, not at Disney, but somewhere else, right? And they learn to echo each other, that one woman says it, and then a second one immediately says, that's a great idea, and repeats it. And a third one repeats it. And after about 3 times, the men room finally
gets through their thick skull.
And they catch on. So it's a combination. I've said, and unfortunately, that's probably happened many times.
Yeah, I hope that's changing. I know that when I speak to like SCAD or some of the students that are the up and coming talent, when I look over Zoom, I'd say a good 80% are females. So I think that we're going to see a shift in that. But us old farts, that was definitely true at the time.
Yeah, no, there's been a huge transition. Like I said, we talked about it. I was there a long time. There was, when I look back, I even see the distance of it. But I'll make a joke about when I started at Imagineering and I was in the model shop. Well, I'd go to a production meeting and there'd be 20 people in the room. It's all guys. Half of them are smoking. And the only woman that would show up in the room was Marty's secretary to bring him a note. right? And 30 years later, when I'm working on things had changed. We finally had some wonderful women designers who were part of our group, like Rennie Rao Marquez and Karen Armitage and Julie Svensson, and Nina Ray Vaughn. And so we had more and more women be a part of it. But by the time I was done, when I was working on Shanghai, I sat down in a room once in a production meeting on our team, and I looked around. The show producer was a woman, the writer was a woman, the coordinator was a woman, the associate designer was a woman. It was, it was like, yep, this is a different, and nobody was smoking either.
Yeah, no one was smoking.
Thank God. But, yeah. And you're right. And, thank heavens, because you got more views, more richness to the stories. It's
much more diversity too in the cultural makeup of the people too, which is only going to make it better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. I know we talked about that, Chris, when you were on the podcast, but it's always good to hear because, like you said, I mean, for a lot of different reasons, but even so, it's going to lead to better output, better parks, everything. But I mean, beyond, there's so many other reasons why it's important too.
It has already. I've seen it many times in the projects in that last 10 years, especially, things we did on Shanghai. And it was just, we had a great team and just great women leading the team and some great designers to choose from and to work with. And our range of skills had got much bigger.
Yep.
And like you mentioned, culturally too.
For sure. Well, speaking of kind of things that are going more in the future, I know that also, design, the type, like we mentioned it up front when I was asking Don about Facebook Horizons, VR and everything, that's not exactly an example, but it's one example of how technology's evolved. And I know that 3D design tools are becoming a lot more prevalent, and even just how attractions are done is a lot different. So I'm curious, I'll ask you, Don, first too, just, I know it's changed a lot, but how has it really impacted like what we see with attractions? So not as much like just what has changed technologically, but like the finished product, how does that end up impacting it beyond just what you do as your job?
Well, one of the things that is reflecting on the way we did business before is that a handful of professionals had the ability to decipher the hieroglyphs of an architectural drawing. It's not necessarily that everyone is born with the ability to look at an elevation or look at a plan and immediately understand what the 3D space is doing, especially as we're starting to work internationally, that something that Chris and I could draw and look at each other and go, I know exactly what the size of that is. I know what it's going to be like to be in it. The clients won't. And so there's a demand now to have you, even really early on in the design process, take them to the place that you're designing. And so I'm often having the discussion of, does this mean that we'll never draw a drawing again? And absolutely not. I always reach for pens and paper first. That's the way I think best. And if I were to reach for the 3D tools first, sometimes that can suggest that the design is further along than it really is. And so I've been starting to try to do this sort of hybrid where I do a rough sketch and I bring the sketch into 3D so that it's the right scale, but the client is understanding that what they're looking at is just as rough as that sketch, but they're getting this three-dimensional information that they wouldn't have had before. And as an example, one of the ways that when we used to do theme parks when it came to when we were going to put up a castle or we were going to put up a mountain, we would do a visual study where they would take weather balloons and they would fly them out, in the actual park. And then, usually John Hench would walk around and see where he could see the weather balloon to understand what the visual noise was of that themed element when you were on Main Street or in Tomorrowland. Well, nowadays, as the part of the brainstorming process, you can take something as loose as a bubble diagram or a really, really rough scale sketch of a master plan and draw a two-dimensional mountain with whatever theming is on top of it, and then bring it in at scale, and then jump into VR and get the same experience John Hench was getting when he was standing in the park looking at weather balloons, even in the roughest form. So those initial sketches are just as valuable as they always were, but now they're packed with additional information, which was, what does it feel like to stand at the base of a mountain that's 300 feet tall, even though it was done on flimsy with a felt tip marker?
I love the fact that you're doing the hybrid because the hybrid kind of product, because I ran into the same thing. The advent of Photoshop, and not to mention the 3D tools, I noticed it all the time was there'd be a mistaken impression that we'd completed design.
Right.
And we were in concept. And because it's right there, right? You can see it in 3D and you can walk through it. Okay, you guys have it all figured out, right? And the fact is that we'd be not any farther along than we'd have been if it was a foam core model, a rough foam core model, and it just gives that impression. And it's partly because it's photorealistic, if you want it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I would do the same thing as mix drawings into Photoshop or sketch over dimensional, get some dimension down in 3D and then sketch over it. So the end product is a sketch, just to make sure it's clear that there's a lot more work here to do.
Yeah, no, it's super important. And the thing is that I've discovered that clients actually appreciate that because it reminds them. The other thing that's happening, this is where I'm going to be old, get off my land guy, is that there's also a push to do what is called photo bashing, which is they're taking lots of photographs, and this is actually being trained. And a lot of people, illustration world, they actually want this. It's a very fast way to get a lot of imagery done. So you're grabbing images off of Google, you're cutting them out, and you're basically doing a montage and filling it full of people. This is often also done in the architecture world where they want you to see how incredibly diverse the audience is and how they're all milling around the architecture. But the problem is that often in the act of the speed of photo bashing, they are losing some of the rules of good storytelling, composition, light and dark, even the consistency of the way the light's hitting the individual people in the crowd in service of it being a fast image. And what it's done is it's kind of trained the clients to ask for photo bashed images. But what you end up doing is you end up creating a picture that's sort of lying to you about what the finished results are going to look like without necessarily the design of how it's actually going to function. So you'll see a lot of stuff out there, not often the marketing pieces, but internal stuff that is just thrown together in a way to give a really quick idea of what it feels like, but often before anyone's really figured out what it is they're depicting.
Yeah, I've also seen a lot of that. And I've seen some people that are particularly adept at it. I remember in Shanghai, they had a couple of artists that came in who were freelancers and did big, beautiful renderings of these, atmospheric pieces. And it was clear that they were doing that. And it's a good tool for some things, but like you said, it's like Tom Gilling used to say, once you get the values right and the composition, the color doesn't matter. It was like you got to have those basic elements of design strong to really get a good design, and you can lose it in the technology. And secondly, that'll likely, in some ways, that'll be a fad where that'll be popular for a while, and then it'll lose its attraction because people have seen so much of it. And then the people have spent years training themselves to do that, where are they going?
The entire art of book for Game of Thrones is like 300 pages of photo bashing. Now, granted, they made that amazing series based upon those images. So it is a tool. It's an iterative tool, part of the conversation of design, but in some cases it ignores some of the rules of visual storytelling in the need to get it done quickly.
That raises an interesting question too, which is kind of not exactly related to design, but just with attractions, because, I do almost every podcast I do, people bring up they were influenced by Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion, and it's a lot of the same attractions, which are classics and amazing attractions, but obviously technology's changed and we've seen super high-tech attractions, some that are very successful, Rise of the Resistance, Flight of Passage, Harry Potter, The Forbidden Journey, whatever one you want to use as an example. As we're kind of looking ahead, do we see, I think there's core components of what makes an attraction great, but I know that everyone has different ideas of that. Do we see that technology is just going to continue to become the big push, or like, will guests in the long run, as we see more and more advances, still flock to some of those original classics? I know it's a big question. I'm just curious for your thoughts.
Well, I think one of the reasons that we've returned to the classics, granted they're classic and they're wonderful, but at the same time, if our experience as children was infused with those attractions, even the ones that weren't maybe the top tier e-ticket attractions, we have a huge emotional connection to them. It's kind of like cafeteria hamburgers when you're in elementary school. There was nothing about those things that was good. But every so often I'll have this desire for like a really cheap cafeteria hamburger because it's utterly rooted into my childhood experience. And I question things like, for whatever reason, the choice is to remove the Bugs Life land. You are taking away, for whatever the reason, you are taking away some quintessential childhood memories in the choice of removing it. Disneyland will never be finished, so it'll always be changing, and that's just the reality of it. And I think that that's great. But at the same time, I think we can also fall in love with non-classic things purely because they are so rooted in our childhood memories of having experienced them. Certainly, Monsanto's Inner Space was one that I think probably not a lot of people would ride today, but I have super fond memories of having experienced it as a kid.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful, it's just mad. It was magic. It was magic.
Pure magic.
It was whatever it is, 8 minutes of magic.
Yeah.
All kinds of things going on there. Not to mention some of the stories the operators would tell us about what people were doing in that ride.
Doing it, conception.
Could only be seen by the infrared cameras. But no, it's, there's so many fond memories. And it's always that balance, right, of nostalgia. Like, nostalgia is a wonderful thing. On the same time, you don't want it to lock, Disneyland is, I remember we had this discussion about like Tiki Room and all. Disneyland's not a museum. We don't want it to turn into a museum. So how do we refresh these things and bring new things in it and more interest? And it's all, especially because it is such a powerful memory and experience for people. Each park has that, these absolutely priceless memories from their family. Having their kids there, and so you have to kind of walk that fine line or walk that line and go, okay, what do we keep and what do we don't? We did that with Tom Sawyer Island. I actually got yelled at. we went down to start that project, which was a rush. That was an unusual thing because that was 9 months, I think, from, in fact, not even that. About 9 months from when they said go to when we opened the door. The first day we closed it down, they said, okay, it's closing on Sunday. So Monday morning, we're down there at 7:00 to go to ride to the island, work on it. And we all go out and this raft comes over and this raft driver is scowling at us. He's just scowling at us. I'm going, hi, it's, what's going on here? And I guess he couldn't contain himself. He just goes, how dare you guys mess with Tom Sawyer Island? Walt worked on this island? Walt personally worked on this island. We love this island. What are you? And I looked at him and I said, I had this brief moment of thinking, could I push him over the side and then just drive this route? No, I appreciate what he was coming from. But I said to him, everybody in this group, we are the most avid fans of Disneyland you could find anywhere. We love the island too. And we will not do anything that will harm it at all. We're here to make it better. So he kind of muttered and, got us out to the island. We started our job. Like 3-4 months later, we get it done. And I had a couple of the same operations people come up to me and go, man, we really like it. You guys did a good job.
Yeah.
We want, we really appreciate that you cared, you treated it so well. I said, okay. And that was definitely, okay, what are we going to keep? What is not working anymore? What's still working? How could we make it better? We made it much more accessible. We put the story into it that everybody loved and it fit, and one of my favorite moments there was, it was my one time to really do a song and dance, presentation for John Lasseter when he was, had become the creative advisor to Imagineering and was working on so many things. But I researched it and and I'd ask people, I had these boards, I still have pictures of these things I read back through Tom Sawyer, I read back through Huckleberry Finn and all that. I said, do you know why Tom Sawyer went to the island and his friends, Joe Harper and Huck Finn? Do you know why they went to the island? They went to the island to be pirates. That's why there's a pirate flag on the raft, because in the story they say, let's go over there and be pirates. We've had enough of this civilization. We're going over there to be pirates. And then they got homesick. And then there's a wonderful speech, and we actually put it on the construction fence later on. It said, how'd you like to light on a rotting treasure chest full of silver and gold? And that was Tom, encouraging Huck and Joe, who were getting homesick and wanted to go back and get some good food to eat. So that's why that was always there. And there were these little things like Smuggler's Cove was originally called Pirate's Cove. And Walt did work on the place. But there was that piece of it. So we said, okay, we'll just kind of embellish that. Lafitte's anchor is right over there. It's been parked there for the last few decades. That's New Orleans Square, Barataria Bay and all that. That backstory is right here in Mississippi. So we can tie these things together, and we did. And it was, respecting the memory of that one. And it was named, very carefully named. We didn't turn the island into Pirate's Lair. It became Pirate's Lair at Tom Sawyer Island.
Yeah.
We didn't change the name. So It was, anyway, that was a lot of fun to work on in many ways. I told you a little bit about Dan. I think I told you a little bit about how joyous that was to work on it. But
oh yeah,
we're fans too. We're that. That's part of the reason we can do a good job is because we care. We've cared so much about the place. I was on Tom Sawyer Island when I was a kid and have fond memories. I brought my kids out there, and now in the very near future, when when I can get in there again, I'll take my grandkids out there. And that's, that's a really special kind of memory.
I think you bring up a really example because, for me, I can fall into that where I went as a kid a lot to Florida. And I mentioned this, I think, in our last roundtable, Don. But, the ones that I love are like all the Epcot Center things. And like if you had wings was, oh my gosh, love that so much. Some of these things where I'm like, yeah, part of that might be a little nostalgia, but I appreciate it when there's something I really like that maybe is still there, but in a different way or something. Like you mentioned with Tom Sawyer Island, I have to kind of check myself sometimes because I'm like, oh, but it was so great, and it's like, yeah, but how would it be if I walked in the door today and it was
right?
new? Well, I don't know.
Yeah, you're definitely a huge fan of Epcot and its first incarnation too, and so that there are have been powers to change that, but I deeply miss the World of Motion and Horizon and some of those early attractions are just, it's a crime that we can't go on them right now.
I know. I try to hold myself back, but I agree. All right. Well, I have one last question before we finish here. And it kind of relates, this is a little bit about putting on your kind of prophecy idea here, but we're still kind of in hopefully the latter stages of a pandemic, and obviously I'm thinking more long term, not like during the end of it here, but it's probably going to have an impact on the type of attractions we see because we had a stretch beforehand where things like the Void and virtual reality and things we put on headsets and everything were becoming big, and obviously those basically aren't in existence at this point, and theme parks were looking into things like, let's be more interactive beyond just playing a game. And I'm just curious for your thoughts on, and I can start with you, Chris, just, what types of attractions do you think we might see? Maybe it won't have much of an impact, but I'm curious if it might change the types of things we see at a park. And I'm not asking you to predict it. It's more, I'm just curious, what do you think might happen?
Mickey's 10 Commandments, put yourself in your audience shoes. We all have this experience now. And I think every day, I'm discussing it with some friends or family. This has been a really difficult time. And it also strikes very deeply. This is about our survival. This is something that has endangered people, it has killed a lot of people, has sickened even more, just huge numbers of people, and still is around the world. And we haven't dealt with something like this before, really. We're kind of winging it all the way along. Experts and everybody, for all we know it. So there's this, we're kind of feeling it as we go. Every area, Florida had certain rules, California had certain rules. There's controversy about all these things, but in the long run what worked and what didn't. Some of it we won't know. We still don't know about when you wear masks, when you don't, when you have, how you do a queue line. So I think a lot of it's up in the air. But the other side, it gets very personal. You know, there's a side of this that's very personal. It's like, when do I feel safe to have myself and my grandkids at Disneyland? That's the bottom line. When will I feel safe, and what kind of things will I feel safe to do? I went there with some friends in May at an employee opening, and I was perfectly happy to be there. I appreciated the fact that queue lines were spread out, that they didn't put many, they only half filled the pirate or third filled the pirate boat. And it was a limited number of people. So I was able to kind of keep a comfortable social distance. We're outdoors and we had masks. So I felt good in those circumstances. I don't know when it will be okay again to get in a crowd on Main Street, packed shoulder to shoulder, and watch the fireworks. I don't know how long it's going to be before I feel at all comfortable doing that. But that's just me. Some people will, some people won't. So we're kind of feeling our way down to, and secondly, this is a good place for a plug for vaccines, is the more people get vaccinated, the more the rules loosen up, so virtually you get up there where everybody's vaccinated and the issues diminish greatly. And that's the message we've been getting for a long time. And that hasn't happened yet. In some places in the world, they've barely got it. But anyway, it's that we need to get to that point where I think what the last thing I've read is when we get to the point where the vaccines plus the natural immunity, and we'll lose people, we'll continue to lose people. But at some point, the natural immunity from having been sick and the vaccines will get to the point where it's not something we worry about, that it's just kind of like the flu. It comes up and it can be risky, but you're careful about it. I think everybody's going to have, a lot of my friends my age have said, I think it was so nice not to have the flu this winter.
Yes.
I think I'm going to get some really stylish masks, and every winter from now on, but the cold season starts, I'm going to be wearing a mask, all around, because that was kind of nice. So and Disneyland has some really nicely styled masks. So it isn't an easy answer, but I think you can see that the parks are working pretty successfully now with some restrictions. Indoors is much more difficult to do than outdoors. So we'll see, but we're all feeling our way along.
I was looking through finally my parents' old photographs from their parents and their parents' parents and so on and so forth. And I found a photograph in front of the ferry building in 1918 of my grandmother, who was a teenager, and her aunt and uncle standing there with masks on because they were there during the Spanish influenza. I remember that none of my grandparents ever talked about having gone through that. They talked about the wars, they talked about the earthquake in 1906. Nobody talked about it. And I think a lot of it was they just wanted to distance themselves from that time period, because many more people died of that too than we've experienced, as horrific as this been. And I think there's a part of us that just so desperately wants to go back to normal, that it's not going to get to normal as fast as we would like, but I think we are going to burst out of the gate when there's an opportunity for us to be gathering. So there may be a little bit of amnesia 5 years from now. I think also the other aspect of your question too is about technology and how that is potentially going to change the way we tell stories. And I can reflect on in the mid-90s when video games started to get more graphically interesting and the experience got longer, that there was a real sort of worry that people were going to stay home and play video games rather than going to theme parks. And so there was a gamification of some of the attractions that were happening in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I think that it kind of dawned on the theme park business that, wait a minute, that's not the reason people come here. They're coming here to be together and have a shared experience. And the other thing that they're coming for is they're coming for the opportunity to basically create their own adventure, because everybody enters Main Street, but then once they get to the hub, they begin an entirely unique adventure in a day that can last their whole life in memories. And they're sharing that experience with the people with them. And I think that what theme parks will continue to give us that's unique, that the virtual reality at home will not be able to give us, is that shared experience that adventure together in a place that is meant to entertain us. And if things like VR are folded into some of the attractions, they can only be so if I never am separated from the experience of being together with others while I have that experience. And so while we sort of wring our hands at the potential of VR at stealing away some of the interest in theme parks, I don't think it's going to be capable of doing that, because it could never deliver that visceral, that warm body next to warm body, elbows hitting each other, going down the drop in Pirates of the Caribbean and laughing and getting wet, like you can have in a Disney park.
Yeah, we're our senses, our experience of walking around. Well, just right now, in the space you're in, there's so much we unconsciously perceive. The air temperature, the air movement, the space. Spaces sound different. We can even tell when a space changes shape just with our ears. Mm-hmm. You can hear that on a record. You can hear the room that the musician is in. Same thing, actually. So yeah, for all the tools, and I just did a wonderful time with my son where we all took turns doing the Oculus Rift, and I was amazed how far it's come from what I saw. We also got kind of nauseous afterwards. So there's still that to overcome, but it was pretty remarkable. But there's nothing like the physical. There's so much to a physical experience. I remember, per what Don's saying, I remember when we did the Star Wars, attraction with the simulator, and other people did simulators, and there were a lot of people at times saying, well, the roller coaster's dead. Nobody will have to build one anymore. You just build the box, and then it can be one roller coaster, and then it can change, and you can do infinite numbers of roller coasters. Well, they're still building roller coasters. That box has its own limits, and there's nothing like roaring around, thinking they're going to throw you into the sky at any second, and the air whipping by, and this music on something like Screamin' Incredibles and Space Mountain, and so yeah, the theme parks give us something, and I think we're already jumping back into it as fast as we can, and we'll probably have our ups and downs with COVID, but it's not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. I also love it. Just one last point is that's part of what I love about a plug for the TEA, the Themed Entertainment Association. We get these designers from all over the world, and they're designing museums and zoos and concerts and things like Meow Wolf, which what the heck is that, and theme parks and all these things. And they're taking the same tools and creating new types of experiences where we do it all together. And and the Void is certainly one. And we're doing it. Escape rooms, did that with my sons. What a great time. Their issue is repeatability. That, I love that because the industry is just growing. Mm-hmm. There's constantly coming up with same thing, and yet it'll still be the fun of like climbing on that Dumbo ride or climbing in that pirate boat, climbing in the Cars vehicle and going through Radiator Springs, or seeing that character come up, right? How do you match that when Mater comes up and talks to you? It's just, it's really wonderful. It's been, I love the business we're in and the possibilities ahead. So
I agree. And that's one thing I've missed the most, about not being in the parks is, I can watch the greatest YouTube video of something, but it's not the same to just walk through those areas, especially, just like you said, it's not, the rides are great, but all the other elements, just being in a space with people and all that is really special. Well, I could go on forever, but I think that's a great place to end. Both those answers were amazing. Thanks to both of you for being on. Chris, you're putting out some really cool stuff on Instagram, so I'd love to have you let everybody know where that is and anything else you're doing. Yeah,
it's at Chris Runco 52. 52 the year that Imagineering started.
Excellent. Well, I really enjoy it. It seems like there's something amazing there, however often you're putting up there. But
I'm trying to do it every week.
Yeah, it's pretty often. I know. I was going to say every day, but I was like, is it that often? Don't want to hold you to that. But Don, I know, like I mentioned on YouTube and everything else, but where could people find out what you're doing?
Well, Instagram, it's Don J. Carson on Instagram. And I do have a Patreon page, which I do post a lot of more insider stuff. And that can be reached through my website, which is doncarsoncreative.com. Anyway, Instagram is a nice free way to be able to see what I'm working on or have worked on in the past.
doncarsoncreative.com?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going there right after this.
You're all set for the rest of the night.
Got some more ideas to steal. I know where to find them now.
Come get them.
Come get them.
Well, thanks so much to both of you. This has been amazing.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for setting this up, because what a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this roundtable, you should definitely check out the previous roundtables with Don Carson, Jolyn Cicero, Andy Sinclair Harris, and Chris Merritt on 3 different episodes. You can find those and a lot more at tomorrowsociety.com/podcasts with an S at the end. I'd like to give a huge shout out to my latest member of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon, Christopher Smith. Thank you, Christopher. You're awesome, and it really makes a difference to help support the show. If you'd like to learn more about how to support the Tomorrow Society podcast and get access to some cool perks, go to patreon.com/Tomorrow Society, or you can go to tomorrowsociety.com/member. If you'd like to get a hold of me, email me at dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Follow me on Twitter at TomorrowSOC, Facebook or Instagram at Tomorrow Society. The Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I'll be talking with Len Testa. We are doing a theme park think tank, talking about some big issues related to Walt Disney World and beyond. Going to really dig in, and Len, with his work on the Disney Dish and, of course, touringplans.com, Unofficial Guide, is the perfect person to talk with and have back on the show. Thank you so much for listening. Go out there and get vaccinated. It helps us all and allows us to go out there and do great things like go to theme parks and a lot more. And I will talk to you again next time.